Mother Teresa was a fanatic, fundamentalist, and a fraud. She was not a friend of the poor, as she claimed to be. She was a friend of poverty. Preached it as a good thing, as a gift from God, something to be welcomed along with other kinds of suffering. Wasn't interested in alleviating it. Was a friend of the rich. Took money from the Duvalier family in Haiti, one of the most obscenely bloated dynastic dictatorships in history. Took money from Charles Keating, the man who robbed Americans blind through the Lincoln Savings and Loans. Stolen money. All to build convents in her own name, more than 200 of them around the world, in order to found an order that bore her name. This is not modesty either, nor is it humility. It doesn't exhaust my critique of her either. We all know there is a cure for poverty. It's a rudimentary one. It does work, though. It works everywhere for the same reason. It's colloquially called the empowerment of women. It's the only thing that does work. If you allow women some control over their cycle of reproduction, so that they're not chained by their husbands or by village custom to annual animal-type pregnancies, early death, disease, and so on. If you will free them from that, give them some basic health of that sort, and if you're generous enough to throw in perhaps a handful of seeds and a bit of credit, the whole floor, culturally, socially, medically, economic, of that village will rise. It works every time. Mother Teresa spent her entire life campaigning against that outcome. She said that contraception was equivalent to abortion morally, and abortion was morally equivalent to murder. She was entirely against the only thing that cures poverty. I would say that her preachments led to an enormous increase in the amount of poverty, ignorance, filth, and disease in the world. And I would further add, without embarrassment, that it's off those things that the Roman Catholic Church has always fed and made its living. Otherwise, there would have been no need for the Protestant Revolution, which brings us here today.
عندما أريد أن أبحث عن مسألة دينية أرجع لتراثنا، لكن عندما أريد أن أبحث عن مسألة دنيوية ما الذي جعلنا متخلفين والآخر مزدهرون، هو لابد أن أجده عند الآخرين وليس في تراثنا.
عند من هم الآخرين؟
الآخرين هم الغرب بدون
الغرب.
شك. نعم،
الغرب وليس الشرق.
الشرق الآن هو مقلد. يعني عندما نأتي لليابان نجد أنه لولا انفتاحه على ثقافة الغرب لبقي متخلفا أيضا. الإنسان العربي مطموس الفردية في هذا المجتمع، ولهذا تحركه.
ايش تقصد مطموس الفردية؟
ليس قادرا على أن يفكر تفكيرا مستقلا، ولهذا تجد أنه دائما يرفض ما يرفضه المجتمع ويقبل ما يقبله المجتمع، ولهذا بقي
يعني روح الجماعة مثلا هي السائدة؟
هي روح الإمعية، روح القطيع، وليس بعد الجماعة فقط. هي روح القطيع الذي لا يستطيع أن يخرج من الأسر العام الذي من الثقافة السائدة. يعني ما يعتبره المجتمع جيدا يعتبره هو جيدا، لا يستطيع أن يفكر تفكيرا مستقلا وأن يستفيد من ثقافات الآخرين. هو غير قادر على أن يخرج من النطاق الذي ضرب عليه منذ طفولته.
طيب، هل يجب أن يكون الفرد العربي مثلا متمردا؟
لا، ليس متمردا، وإنما يجب أن يبحث عن الحقيقة، ألا يلغي ذاته ويندمج ويذوب في القطيع.
تنتقد العرب وتثني على إسرائيل، هل ترى أن العرب يجب أن يقتدوا بالتجربة الإسرائيلية؟
لا، إسرائيل لم تصنع نفسها، هي امتداد للغرب، هم امتداد لثقافة الغرب وليسوا صانعين لأنفسهم. أنا قلت أنها امتدادات، ولهذا شبهتها
بأستراليا
ونيوزيلندا وإلى آخره، جنوب أفريقيا. شوف،
وهذا تعتقد أنه
أنا أعتقد أنه أنا ودي أشير للنقطة هنا مهمة.
بس بسألك عفوا أبو عبد الرحمن، يعني هذه القصة هل تعتبر أنه كون بعض الدول امتداد للغرب جانب سلبي ولا جانب إيجابي؟
لا، جانب إيجابي.
يعني المفروض احنا نمتد للغرب أيضا؟
لا، نستفيد من هذه التجربة السخية. الازدهار هو الذي صنعه هو الغرب، لم نصنع شيئا حتى الآن، ما زلنا عالة على الغرب نحن. يعني حتى اليابان تعترف بأنها لو لم تستفد من الغرب لما تطورت.
الازدهار في ماذا؟
الازدهار في كل شيء،
في التقنية مثلا،
في قيمة الإنسان، في حرياته، في حفظ كرامته، في تطور العلم، في تطور التقنيات، في تطور الحياة. هل ترى أن الحياة الآن مثل الحياة قبل 10 قرون؟ كل هذا التغير الهائل هذا صنعه الغرب. من الذي
في صدر الإسلام خرجوا من صحرائهم فاتحين لا دارسين، ماذا تقصد بفاتحين لا دارسين أستاذ إبراهيم؟
يعني أنا أرى أنه العرب استمروا خلال القرون وما زالوا يعتقدون أن لديهم من العلم الكفاية، ولديهم من العلم والحكمة الكفاية، وأنهم ليسوا محتاجين إلى أن يتعلموا من الآخرين، لأنهم ظهروا على مسرح التاريخ كفاتحين وليسوا دارسين، ومعلمين وليسوا متعلمين، واستمرت عندهم هذا الوهم.
مرشدين لا مسترشدين.
نعم، ومرشدين لا مسترشدين. يعني ما زال هذا الوهم باقيا عندهم رغم أن الدنيا كلها تغيرت. الدنيا تغيرت وهم ما زالوا يظنون أنهم من واجبهم أن يعلموا الآخرين، من واجبهم أن يعلموا الآخرين، ومن واجب الآخرين أن يصغوا إليهم، وهم ليس لديهم أصلا أن يقدموه للآخرين، ومع ذلك ما زالوا. ولهذا هذا الوهم الفظيع، هذا الشعور بالكمال، هذا الشعور بأنهم يجب أن يتعلموا من الآخرين، هو الذي جعلهم عاجزين عن أن يستفيدوا من حضارة العصر.
Why don't you accept this wonderful offer? Why wouldn't you like to meet Shakespeare, for example? I mean, I don't know if you really think that when you die you can be corporeally reassembled and have conversations with authors from previous epochs. It's not necessary that you believe that in Christian theology, and I have to say it sounds like a complete fairy tale to me. The only reason I want to meet Shakespeare, or might even want to, is because I can meet him any time, because he is immortal in the works he's left behind. If you've read those, meeting the author would almost certainly be a disappointment.
Do you at least acknowledge that all of the scientific evidence points to an Earth that is vastly older than 6,000 to 10,000 years old?
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Okay, so how do you reconcile...
It doesn't prove there's no God.
You're right. Did I say it did? I'm not saying that proves there's no God. What I'm saying is, here's something we've learned about the universe, and it doesn't match with your literal view of the Bible. Now, there's a conflict there, and we need to resolve that. And some people resolve it in favor of the Bible, saying the Bible's absolutely right, and ignore whatever actual evidence is presented there. I find that to be patently absurd, because it turns Christianity into a self-contradictory proposition, which is, and so, by the way, does the entire idea of a revelation in the New Testament. Because your position, to the extent that I understand it, because I haven't got a kind of a straight answer yet, is one where there is a God who has an important message for mankind, and somehow he only reveals it to certain individuals who then write this down, and thousands of years after this initial revelation, we have to rely on copies of translations of copies by anonymous authors with no originals, and a textual testimony to a miracle, for example, the loaves and fishes. There's no amount of reports, anecdotal testimonial reports, that could be sufficient to justify believing that this event actually happened as reported. No amount. And anything that would qualify as a God would clearly understand this, and if it wanted to convey this information to people in a way that was believable, would not be relying on text to do so. And this, for me, is the nail in the coffin for Christianity. That the God that Christians believe in is amazingly stupid if it wants to actually achieve its goal of spreading this information to humanity by relying on text, by relying on languages that die off, by relying on anecdotal testimony. That's not a pathway to truth. And anything that would qualify for a God should know this, which means either that God doesn't exist, or it doesn't care enough about those people who understand the nature of evidence to actually present it. Now, which of those possibilities do you think is accurate?
I think you do need faith to believe it.
Sure. And why would you believe anything on faith? Faith isn't a pathway to truth. Every religion has some sort of faith. People take things on, if faith is your pathway, you can't distinguish between Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, any of these others. How is it that you use reason as a path to truth in every endeavor of your life, and then when it comes to the ultimate truth, the most important truth, you're saying that faith is required? And how does that reflect on a God who supposedly exists and wants you to have this information? What kind of God requires faith instead of evidence? Faith is the excuse people give for believing something when they don't have evidence. I mean, if you can come up with something that I believe that I don't have evidence for, guess what I'll do? I'll stop believing it. That's the nature of a rational mind. That is the goal. My only goal was to be the best Christian I could be. and represent this to people who didn't believe. And what I found, because I actually cared about whether or not my beliefs were true rather than whether they felt good, was that my beliefs weren't justified. Try as I might and pray as hard as I could. No answer comes. No evidence is forthcoming. And when I talk to people about this, the only answer they ever offer is the one you did, which is, well, you just got to have faith. Well, sorry, I don't. And not only I'm not sorry that I don't, I'm sorry for others that they think that I should have, because faith is not a virtue.
Well, I think church gives a lot of people some community and some values.
Religions and churches have tons and tons of benefits for the in-group. And some of them even have benefits for some of the out-groups with, feeding the homeless. Although I really wish, as many of the atheists do, we have the Atheists Helping the Homeless group in Austin, where we will actually help the homeless without making them sit through a sermon first. We're not holding their sandwich ransom in the name of Jesus. There's no good thing that a church or religion does that cannot be achieved by purely secular means. And there's no positive benefit of churches and religions that necessarily demonstrates the truth of their supernatural claims. But the absurdity of the divisive nature of Christianity in particular, and by the way, I'm an atheist with regard to all gods, but since you're kind of representing Christianity, it breaks my heart. People who actually understand what love is, people who actually understand what morality is, people who actually understand reality, it is almost unbearable to watch the people that you love be so absolutely duped into a divisive, hateful religion that they think is not divisive, they think it's inclusive, and they think it's positive. It kills me, and it's one of the reasons that I do this. Because I, for 25 plus years, believed this stuff. I am so happy that I no longer think that my former roommate is destined for hell. I am so happy that despite the fact that my relationship with my parents, the nature of it has changed, I don't have to worry about them. The division is entirely one-sided. I didn't end relationships when I became an atheist. Christians ended those relationships, and it was because their particular religion cannot tolerate. I had letters from people who said, we can no longer associate with you. You are of the devil. Now, it's possible that they're right. It's possible. I don't know under what circumstances. But the only way that you could demonstrate that is with reason and evidence and not faith. And I don't know how we can fix a world where people have been so convinced that they are doing the right thing out of compassion and love and trying to help people when it is absolute poison, when it is absolutely destructive. I wish everybody could go through what I went through so they could have a proper understanding of, wow, how the heck could I have believed those things that I believed? And how much better life is when you want to deal with reality on reality's terms. But if your whole position is that the foundation of your belief is necessarily dependent on faith, then we got nothing to talk about. Because I don't think that that's a good thing. And until you demonstrate that faith is a good thing, how could you possibly convince somebody? And by the way, how do you go about demonstrating that faith is a good thing without evidence? It all comes back to reason and evidence.
I want to live my life taking the risk all the time that I don't know anything like enough yet, that I haven't understood enough, that I can't know enough, that I'm always hungrily operating on the margins of a potentially great harvest of future knowledge and wisdom. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'd urge you to look at those of you who tell you, those people who tell you at your age that you're dead till you believe as they do. What a terrible thing to be telling to children. And that you can only live, and that you can only live by accepting an absolute authority. Don't think of that as a gift. Think of it as a poisoned chalice. Push it aside, however tempting it is. Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.